Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a nuestro evento virtual COP26 y la oportunidad climática para América Latina y el Caribe, Impulsar el financiamiento y las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, coorganizado por el Instituto de Recursos Naturales. Este evento lo transmitimos en vivo, con interpretación en español, portugués e inglés. Te invitamos a elegir el idioma de tu preferencia en la página web del evento. Si nos estás siguiendo desde alguno de nuestros canales de medios sociales, vas a escuchar el idioma de piso e en los comentários podrás acceder à página do evento. Boa tarde e bem-vindos ao nosso evento virtual COP26 e a oportunidade climática para a América Latina e o Caribe, impulsionando o financiamento e as soluções baseadas na natureza, coorganizado pelo Instituto de Recursos Naturais. Transmitimos este evento em vivo, em espanhol, português e inglês, e convidamos você a escolher o idioma de sua preferência no site do evento. Se você está nos acompanhando em algum de nossos canais de mídia social, ouvirá o idioma original e nos comentários poderá acessar a página do evento. Good afternoon and welcome to our virtual event COP26 and the Climate Opportunity for Latin America and the Caribbean, Unlocking Finance in Nature-Based Solutions. This event is co-hosted by the World Resources Institute and the Inter-American Development Bank. We have interpretation in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and you can choose your preferred language on our website. If you are following us from social media channels, you'll be listening to the original language, and if you prefer, you access the event page direction in the comments section. We will begin with a keynote conversation between WRI President Ani Dasgupta and IDB President Mauricio Claver-Carone on the climate change stakes for the region today, how mitigation and green growth can be a major drive of post-pandemic recovery, and how to find the financial resources to make it happen. President Dasgupta, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be joined by President Claver-Carone of the Inter-American Development Bank to discuss how the IDB is upping its response to climate change, the critical moment facing Latin America and the Caribbean as COP26 approaches, and the opportunity to drive more investments into climate action and a green recovery from the pandemic, including through nature-based solutions. This conversation is a part of the launch event for a new research from IDB and WRI entitled Nature-Based Solutions in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's been an absolute pleasure to collaborate with IDB. For those of you who might not know, nature-based solutions are strategies that enhance the health of nature to achieve tangible development outcomes. Investment in nature solutions, or NBS to be short, offer three kinds of benefits. They can help countries improve infrastructure delivery, avoid losses from climate impact, saving countries billions of dollars each year. For example, wetlands and forests can absorb and filter floodwater, which helps to protect downstream communities, maintain water supply, and avoid damages to buildings and roads. Nature-based solutions can also generate direct economic gains through jobs in tourism, increased productivity of food, fish, timber, and most importantly, they can deliver other benefits from cleaner air to protection of biodiversity, and critically, NBS can provide 1/3, I repeat, 1/3 of the climate mitigation needed between now and 2030 to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. These win-win solutions have been around for decades, but especially have gained real traction since the Climate Action Summit of 2019. Nature-based solutions is now a core theme in climate action worldwide, and it's really a priority for Glasgow COP26. In fact, some people are calling this the Nature COP. The COP is setting aside November 6th as a nature day and have a session in the first 2 days is 150 heads of states will gather. And they're setting us on 3 hours of discussion just on nature. These are all very good signs. So President Claver-Carone, this is an absolute pleasure to be here with you. How are you? And it's been a pleasure to collaborate with you.
Thank you so much, Anya. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for World Resources Institute. And hey, it's been a mutual pleasure here working with you as well.
Thank you, Mauricio. Mauricio, Latin American Caribbean region is one of the world's regions that's most affected by the impact of climate change. However, the region also has much to gain from aggressively addressing the issue today as part of the green economic transition, something that you're focused on. How would you describe the challenge and, most importantly, the opportunity for the region?
Yeah. Hey, look, I think you mentioned it before. We have great momentum here. And like I said, this is part of, the enthusiasm that we have and the mutual enthusiasm we have, the joint work that we're doing to consider really what climate change means for the future of Latin America and the Caribbean. And look, yes, and you said it, that's in terms of both the vulnerabilities, obviously, which we're all familiar with, but also, and you hinted towards it, the tremendous potential that our region can realize with the right green policies going forward. Our role as the region's leading development bank is to really help our 26 borrowing members mitigate, adapt to the risk, and really help seize what we see as a once-in-a-generation opportunity that's been presented by the pandemic to really, ironically, to rebuild sustainability. And that means really looking at a holistic approach, focused on creating benefits, both in terms of healthier climate and new opportunities for both green jobs and growth, because it's not a zero-sum game. Green jobs create growth. And you asked me how I describe this challenge. And look, our region is at a historic crossroads, and that's going to force countries to look at climate through a zero-sum winners and losers lens. The point here is that there's not going to be any losers here when we talk about climate. We can all win if we see and pursue the opportunities. Our reality is that the pandemic hit our region harder than any other, with the highest per capita death toll in the world, the worst GDP contraction in 2 centuries, and that's the presidency I walked into at the IDB in the region. But look, like the pandemic, climate change is presenting challenges daily to our region as well. So in addition to all of that, we see 8 of our countries have been ranked amongst the world's top 10 most at risk to climate change. So add that to the challenges. So we've already seen some of the warmest temperatures on record last year. And this year, we already had a record-breaking Atlantic hurricane season. Parts of the Amazon region and in the Pantanal, we've seen droughts, which are affecting the economy of Brazil. It's affecting supply there, and it's been the worst in 6 decades, which is another record year, in addition to forest fires that we're seeing there. Now, these impacts have significant economic costs. We estimate that unless global warming is limited to less than 2 degrees Celsius, our region is going to suffer damage from climate impact that's going to reach $100 billion annually by 2050. So you ask, what do warmer temperatures, more fire, stronger storms in Latin America and the Caribbean mean beyond our borders? And that's going to mean beyond our borders, pricier commodities, packed shipping routes, destruction of crops, and that's going to lead to tens of millions of people seeking migration to migrate from all throughout the Americas in the coming decades, and mainly due to food insecurity. So the push to green economies worldwide is going to be linked to our region as well. And remember, one example is our region, and this is a great opportunity. Our region has large quantities of lithium, rare earth elements that we're going to need to sustainably source to make batteries for electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels, et cetera. And now, unlike the pandemic, the difference here is that there's no vaccine for climate change. So it's really a matter of priorities, commitment, bold mitigation, adaptation, investments that we got to follow through on. So it's really a matter of deciding whether to invest in or innovate for our future in this regards. Now, public budgets, we are seeing them throughout the region. They're extremely tight, particularly after all the anti-cyclical measures in response to COVID-19. But it's also a fact and not recognized enough that climate action is highly compatible with economic growth. When I first joined the IDB a year ago, my first priority was to work with our experts to design a blueprint for strategic investment that's going to accelerate recovery, sustainable, inclusive, long-term growth, and do so with a plan that break down barriers. And that's the result that we saw with our Vision 2025 strategy, which we launched at the annual meeting in Barranquilla in March. And it prioritizes bold action on climate change as one of the 5 pillars, the central pillars here. But that also focuses on integration, strengthen value chains, digitalization, support for small businesses, gender equality, all of which together are linked to a sustainable future. We think here we see got an echo there. We see with the right, we believe that with the right fiscal policies, decarbonization of our region's economies are going to create 15 million net net new jobs by 2030 in areas like plant-based food production, renewable energy, construction, manufacturing, et cetera. And every dollar that we see invested in making infrastructure and economies more resilient can generate up to $4 in economic benefits. So look, the evidence is overwhelming. It's clear. Climate action is business friendly. Let me give you an example. Costa Rica. There we're supporting the National Decarbonization Plan, achieving net zero emissions. And we believe that's going to yield $40 billion plus in net benefits within 3 decades through savings in energy, improvements in ecosystem services, agricultural yields. Let me give you a larger economy, Peru. That achievement could bring $140 billion in net benefits across sectors. So as we head into COP26, we're working in a wide variety of ways, with more ambition, more innovation, more partners than ever, like WRI, to really unlock critical climate finance and drive sustainable recovery for our region and our people in need.
Mauricio, I really like the big examples you used. Our audience would really connect what you're saying.
Hola, buenas tardes. Pedimos disculpas por el tema de la transmisión. Lo estamos buscando en unos minutos ya arreglar este tema. Les pedimos disculpas, les pedimos que estén conectados con nosotros. Como estamos en vivo, estas cosas suelen pasar. Les pedimos miles de disculpas. En algunos minutos regresamos ya con la transmisión. Muchas gracias. Siguen con nosotros. Estimadas, estimados, les pedimos disculpas por los temas de la transmisión. Suele pasar, como estamos en un evento en vivo, estas cosas a veces pasan desafortunadamente, pero les agradecemos mucho por seguir con nosotros. En virtud del tiempo, vamos a seguir la conversación con Fiona Clauder, la embajadora para América Latina y Caribe de la COP26, y enseguida vamos a volver con el panel con nuestros presidentes de WRI y del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. Entonces, le invito ahora a Fiona Clauder para hacer su presentación como parte del evento.
Buenos dias a todos y todas. I'm Fiona Clader, the Regional Ambassador for Latin America and the Caribbean for COP26. It's a great pleasure to talk at this very important IDB meeting about unlocking finance for nature-based solutions. And we're less than 3 weeks away now from COP26, the United Nations Climate Change Conference that will take place in Glasgow, Scotland from the 1st to the 12th of November. So a lot to do before the conference, but a lot to do at the conference. And my main message to everyone listening in from across Latin America and the Caribbean is the need for action. So we need to get on with this very important agenda. We need to take action, not just talk, in our plans for COP26 and our commitments to address climate change. So in the conference, we'll be mobilising on our 4 main objectives on mitigation, with all countries, we hope, coming forward with their NDCs, the nationally determined contributions to reduce emissions targets. But crucially, also looking at progress on long-term strategies. So how do we implement those plans using things like clean transport, switch to new renewable energies, etc. Our second objective is around adaptation and finance, and this is where adaptation resilience, apologies, and this is where the connection with nature and nature-based solutions is so very, very important. And perhaps one thing this terrible year of the pandemic has taught us is that connection between nature, people, and the environment. But to make all these things happen, that needs money, and that's where the role of the financial institutions, such as the IDB, is so very, very important. And of course, core to COP are the international negotiations to take forward the Paris rulebook. But there are so many opportunities across Latin America and the Caribbean, a region that also faces so many challenges with the terrible impact of the pandemic in the loss of life, but also those longer term social and economic impacts. And really the agenda of climate change is also about social and economic change. As we all know, there are lots of risks and challenges ahead, risks and challenges that are escalating. That's what the science tells us. The science, though, also tells us that if we act with ambition and decisively in the next decade, we can contain global temperature rise to within 1.5 degrees. And also there can be many new opportunities for jobs and economic growth. So as well as addressing those challenges of climate change, this is also an opportunity for a green recovery. And that's where the role of the IDB is so crucial. This very important report that is coming out on nature and nature-based solutions in Latin America and the Caribbean. Because this COP is also a great opportunity for the region because of the precious world biodiversity and ecosystems that are contained within this region. It's important to protect and conserve those resources, but also they offer some of the solutions towards addressing climate change. So, for example, I'm talking to you from our embassy from Panama, where just yesterday I saw how restoration of mangroves, swamps, has helped both restore a natural environment, attracting more birds and wildlife, but also is very important in terms of future coastal protection against the impacts of climate change. And this is all seen against a backdrop of the skyscrapers here in Panama, signaling prosperity and growth, but also a city that could be vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So this is where we all need to work together to develop integrated action plans. And that's where the Ministries of Economy and the Ministries of Finance, the experts across the region, taking an integrated approach across different departments of government, an integrated approach with business, and also with civil society. And so also in this region, of course, we have the Amazon and many other precious forests and ecosystems. And as part of COP26, we will be encouraging a declaration on protecting and conserving the world's forests and moving to more sustainable land use, because that precious natural resource is also an important carbon sink. And at the moment, deforestation is also contributing, and that change in land use is contributing to a great portion of the world's emissions. So there are lots of opportunities for Latin America and the Caribbean. There are lots of opportunities for the world to come together to build a better world. And at the heart of all this is people, people's quality of life, people's livelihoods, and people's lives. And it's getting late for words. It's time for action. So we encourage all countries, all governments, all businesses, and all parts of civil society to come forward with ideas and commitments to action, and to hold us all to account on putting those actions in place as quickly as possible for a better world for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clauder, for your words in this event. I'd like to invite now to present the key findings of the reports we are launching today, the Senior Associate of WRI, Suzanne Osmed. Mrs. Osmed, the floor is yours.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay.
We're live.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Janaína, and hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience today. I'm Suzanne Osment from the World Resources Institute, and I'm honored to be here today to share with you key findings from the new research series with the World Resources Institute and Inter-American Development Bank. This three-part series is available online today as of now. You can reach it from the site listed at the bottom of the screen. In this series, IDB and WRI set out to understand the status of nature-based solutions across the region, and also to identify ways to connect nature-based solutions with larger scale investment opportunities. These reports cover a lot of different research that has already existed. So in that way, they review the state of knowledge and also the state of practice of nature-based solutions in the region. They also provide recommendations for donors, investors, governments, and utilities on how they can increase their investment in nature-based solutions. We found that there's a big investment pipeline of nature-based solution projects aiming to integrate green infrastructure and gray infrastructure to build more resilient development solutions. We identified 156 projects in the region, and we realized we're not capturing everything, but it does represent a significant number nonetheless. And we're narrowly focused on nature-based solutions for water and energy security, transport resilience, and urban development. We were not actively seeking projects that were focused on nature-based solutions for climate mitigation, although those obviously play an important role. If anything comes across from this new research to me, it's that nature-based solutions should be more of a priority now than ever before because of the role that these solutions can play in economic recovery and climate action in the region. The table shown here summarizes the most common types of nature-based solutions being applied in the region and the main benefits that they intend to create. It shows that nature-based solutions can enhance infrastructure service delivery by improving water security and disaster risk management. Many studies in the region, which are summarized in the papers, show that these benefits can be quite significant and also cost-effective. More than 70 of these projects also aim to improve livelihoods and alleviate poverty. And at least 30 of them are creating employment opportunities for local community members. So many of these projects are achieving multiple benefits simultaneously. They're also designed to sequester carbon and protect biodiversity. Despite the clear potential, we found that there's a significant shortfall in nature-based solutions investment. Over half of these projects are still under preparation, meaning that they have not gotten to the point they can fully implement their activities. And there's many reasons for this, but a key one is the lack of available funding. 3/4 of these projects currently depend heavily on grants, which are of course important, but it might not be the most financially secure strategy for long-term maintenance and operations of nature-based solutions. And many of these projects are seeking investment in order to tap into new financing strategies. Though these projects are going to require more project preparation support to develop those financing strategies that allow them to tap into larger scale investments. The previous speakers already discussed how finding the money to protect and restore natural capital and address climate change is going to be a significant challenge in the midst of an economic crisis, but we need to act now. These papers show that infrastructure is a main beneficiary of nature-based solutions, but the financing instruments that we use to implement infrastructure do not always easily lend themselves to investments in nature-based solutions. But our papers find that there are opportunities to change that. And if we're able to change that, we can tap into much larger scale investments for nature-based solutions. One of the papers in this series covers what is happening internationally in nature-based solutions finance, such as innovations with green bonds, blended financing, land value capture, endowments, and insurance policies. And these case studies show that billions of dollars can be mobilized for green infrastructure through private finance. To replicate these financing models in Latin America and the Caribbean, enabling conditions need to be put in place. So for example, investors need to come to the table to help us actively design these strategies. Governments and utilities need to deepen their engagement in these projects to help secure revenue and lend their credit worthiness so that investment is possible. And donors and multilateral development banks can support their partners and clients to develop test cases with these financing strategies as well. One of our papers examined how IDB is scaling investments in nature-based solutions. Since 2015, IDB has invested $813 million across 28 nature-based solution projects that integrate green and gray infrastructure. These projects have mainly been with water and urban development, but also with energy and transport sectors. And the paper details the many advantages that these projects have provided in terms of greening and making and boosting the resilience of green infrastructure investments. So IDB's clients, like governments and utilities, should take note of these achievements and begin proposing more nature-based solution projects to IDB and similar banks. Now more than ever, maximizing the impact of investment is critical, and nature-based solution has the potential to help achieve this. The many projects in Latin America and the Caribbean provide an incredible foundation to build on, but these projects are not necessarily going to grow on their own. 3 recommendations from the papers are that we need to more deeply engage private investors to drive financial innovation in this space. We need to boost our monitoring and evaluation efforts to inspire investor confidence. And we need to incorporate nature-based solutions early on into infrastructure planning so that these types of opportunities are routinely considered and nature-based solution projects are routinely identified. To help address all of these goals, we need supportive policies and better cross-sector collaboration. The papers offer a much more detailed set of recommendations on how we can get there. And WRI and IDB will be working on this, hopefully with many of you, to put these recommendations into practice. Finally, I would like to acknowledge the many series co-authors, supporters of the work, as well as 150 plus people who contributed to this work, many of whom are on the line today or will see this recording. So please reach out with any questions or comments, and thank you for your attention. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Elin Mirovic, the head of climate change at IDB Invest, who will be moderating the following panel discussion. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Susan, por esta valiosa presentación y por destacar la importancia de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Como lo mencionó antes Susan, mi nombre es Ilen Meirovich y yo soy la jefa de cambio climático de BID Invest, el brazo privado del grupo BID. Como hemos ido escuchando, las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza pueden contribuir hasta un 40% de reducción de emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero necesarias para alcanzar los acuerdos de París y limitar el calentamiento global a 2 grados para el 2030. Y tenemos poco tiempo. Ustedes saben que salió el reporte en agosto del IPCC que nos recordaba que tenemos menos de una década. No es nada. Menos de una década para cambiar el rumbo hacia lograr estar en menos de 2 grados. Y las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza pueden lograr y ayudarnos a alcanzar estas metas de conservación y protección de la biodiversidad, justo también hoy en el contexto del inicio de la COP de biodiversidad que empieza hoy en China. Como recién lo mencionaba Susan, la naturaleza puede ayudarnos a la recuperación post-pandemia, generar empleos, proteger ecosistemas críticos y movilizar inversión privada. Esto es uno específicamente de los temas en los que nos vamos a enfocar hoy. Hay una gran oportunidad de invertir en soluciones basadas en la naturaleza para la región. Por esta razón es que nuestros colegas de la División de Cambio Climático del Grupo de Capital Natural se abocó a desarrollar esta publicación junto a nuestros colegas del WRI. Y estas publicaciones, como los mencionamos, pueden, pueden bajarlas de los links tanto de las páginas del BID como WRI. Este trabajo es crítico. Ya muestra que hay un pipeline robusto de más de 156 proyectos, como lo mencionó Susan. Muchos de ellos tal vez en estadio inicial, preparatorio, pero las ideas están allí, el interés está allí, la innovación está allí. Y lo que necesitamos es lograr poder movilizar los recursos del sector privado para que estas inversiones o ideas se vuelvan realidad. Y nosotros desde el BID podemos desempeñar un papel clave en orientación de estos proyectos, desde concepto a bancabilidad, a través del apoyo técnico y financiero para la preparación de estos proyectos. Como mencionamos, el BID se ha comprometido a incrementar este apoyo para incorporar consideraciones de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y analizar las oportunidades de acuerdo con los países y en todas las etapas de preparación del proyecto, desde la identificación del proyecto hasta la inversión, hasta la ejecución. Y estas estrategias se alinean perfectamente con la visión 2025. Nosotros en BID Invest tenemos un enfoque renovado dentro de la visión 2025 en promover el crecimiento verde, sostenible, incluyendo a través de financiamiento innovador y la movilización de recursos del sector privado. Y hoy, para hablar de cómo impulsar más esta inversión del sector privado en las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, nos acompañan un excelente panel. Alonso Zapata, jefe del equipo de gestión ambiental de servicios ecosistemas del Servicio de Agua Potable y Alcantarillado de Lima, Lisa William, Vice President of Goldman Sachs, and Zaida Melina Rodríguez, Secretaria de Desarrollo Sustentable del Estado de Yucatán. Gracias por aceptar la invitación a este conversatorio el día de hoy. Entonces, empecemos con vos, Alonso. ¿Cómo podrías contarnos de la experiencia que has tenido en Perú? En el caso de la legislación, entendemos que hay ciertos fondos que se deben designar a la conservación, ecosistemas y la naturaleza. ¿Nos podrías contar un poco sobre los desafíos a los que se han enfrentado para movilizar estos recursos y la implementación de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza?
Sí, muy buenos días con todos. Gracias por la invitación a este gran evento donde podamos compartir nuestras experiencias desde CEAPAL, la empresa de agua potable que abastece el Lima Metropolitana. Bien, sí, efectivamente nosotros tenemos un mandato legal desde el año 2017 para, primero, tener un fondo que proviene del 1% de lo que pagan nuestros usuarios de agua de la capital, y con este fondo ejecutar acciones de conservación, recuperación y uso sostenible de los ecosistemas de donde proviene el servicio de regulación hídrica. Más o menos tenemos alrededor de actualmente unos 20 millones que han sido acumulados en estos tiempos, pero el problema siempre, como bien señalabas, es la ejecución, porque una de las modalidades de ejecución que establece este fondo es a través de inversión pública, contratación de bienes y servicios, contratación de directas con las comunidades y contratar a una entidad autorizada por ley para manejar fondos ambientales. En lo que hemos tenido un poco de experiencia, ya sea PAL, porque no hemos ejecutado un buen número de proyectos, pero sí hemos transitado el ciclo de inversión, que es desde la preinversión, la ejecución, el funcionamiento o la operación y mantenimiento. Entonces, creo que el gran problema que tuvimos inicialmente fue que no teníamos formuladores con quien ejecutar estos proyectos. No había personal lo suficientemente capacitado para ejecutar estos proyectos. Luego tuvimos un problema a lo interno de CEAPAL, que CEAPAL es una empresa dedicada a la infraestructura normalmente gris, de captaciones, alcantarillado, pero no tenía expertise en este tipo de proyectos. Entonces, eso hizo que no pudiéramos avanzar en el ritmo que teníamos que avanzar. Entonces, creo que el primer problema que tuvimos ahí fue ese, no tener, por un lado, formuladores, porque era un tema nuevo y también nuevo hacia lo interior de CEDAPAL. Cuando tuvimos eso para enfrentar, lo primero tuvimos que echar mano a la institucionalidad que había fuera para tratar de contar con los proveedores de este tipo de servicios. Y a lo interno, lo que se hizo fue una pasantía hacia el Fondo de Quito, que tenían ya experiencias en este tipo de proyectos, para que nuestros formuladores, nuestros equipos responsables de presupuesto puedan, los responsables también de licitaciones, puedan ver cómo es que se manejan este tipo de proyectos y sobre todo ver un proyecto in situ, de qué le estamos hablando, desde cuando nosotros hablamos de proyectos basados en la naturaleza o proyectos ecosistémicos o proyectos de siembra y cosecha de agua que nosotros aquí en Perú le llamamos, ¿no? Eso nos permitió concientizar, sensibilizar tal vez, y nos permitió avanzar un poco. Y ahora sabemos bastante bien el proceso de inversión pública, lo conocemos bastante. Claro, la magnitud de CEDAPAL, que tiene prioridades también con obras de infraestructura gris, hace también que lo de infraestructura verde, infraestructura basada en la naturaleza, vaya un poco más lento, pero ya tenemos experiencias en este tipo de proyectos, ¿no? Pero también queremos avanzar las otras modalidades, por ejemplo, las contrataciones directas con las comunidades, que creo que eso es importante, pero para eso hay que hacer arreglos institucionales. También eso creo que nos permitiría muchísimo, porque llevamos directo la inversión, dinamizamos la economía local, y creo que los comuneros son los mejores llamados a hacer estas actividades de conservación, recuperación y uso sostenible de los ecosistemas que abastecen el agua para Lima. Entonces, sí hemos avanzado, ¿no? Ya tenemos un proyecto ahorita en ejecución que busca recuperar un humedal que ha sido degradado por la extracción de su turba, y tenemos otros proyectos en cartera que esperamos en lo que va del año y lo que viene el próximo año poderlos ejecutar. O sea, nuestra experiencia creo que está bien, la vamos avanzando, nos estamos enriqueciendo, y creo que en los próximos años haremos más ejecución con este fondo. Gracias.
No, gracias, Alonso. Muy interesante las experiencias y la identificación rápida de nos falta capacidad de formular los proyectos, nos falta capacidades internas, ¿qué hacemos? Hacemos una pasantía, traemos experiencias de donde se pueda replicar internamente. Esto es muy importante porque un punto que dijiste que me pareció crítico es de qué estamos hablando, y creo que cuando los ojos ven que es un proyecto basado en la naturaleza, todos dentro de una empresa, tanto del sector privado como también del sector público, se entienden más y se abocan a hacer este tipo de proyectos con mayor entusiasmo y mejor predisposición. Entonces, esto de los proyectos de cosecha de agua y que las distintas partes de la empresa lo puedan ver, ayuda muchísimo. Lisa, thank you for joining us. Thank you for bringing us the perspective from Goldman Sachs. We want to do a dive deep into what the private sector experience is with these kind of projects. What do you perceive as the biggest barriers for the private sector to invest in nature-based solutions?
Thank you for having me. So I'm a member of the impact investing business within asset management at Goldman Sachs. And I think in many ways, there are parallels to the early days of impact investing, where there was a general consensus around the need to do something with a core of advocates who were fiercely committed to the cause. And that core was really surrounded by potential actors who were waiting a little bit on the side and wanted more data and case studies with examples of where this approach has worked, where it has failed, and how we can learn from both. I think one of the biggest barriers for the private sector in investing in nature-based solutions is really a failure to differentiate between perceived and real risk. As my team thinks about our role in the market, we have to make this distinction when evaluating opportunities, who we partner with, where we invest. And there are some risks that are viable and need to be outlined and understood prior to allocating capital. However, there are a number of risks that can be de-escalated through diligence. And without doing so, there simply will be no action. So I think an important first step is really taking a look at the top of the funnel and parsing through these risks to identify where there is a lack of understanding around the technology or the science. Can that be complemented with research? Is there bias in the process as it relates to investing in certain markets? Could that be removed through local engagement? And can we really think creatively around financial structures and still achieve our desired social and environmental impact? And then after you've done this, really develop relationships with partners who can help fill those gaps. These can be community leaders, local and national government agencies, environmental groups, and other like-minded investors. So I would say that, two of the biggest takeaways from the category that we can really apply as we think about putting more capital to work in nature-based solutions is really having a willingness to move forward with imperfect information and a real need for flexible and patient capital through, like-minded partnership.
Thank you. And I think that you're touching very important things. Market failures of different kinds of information, the lack of a track record of a specific investment, and how you bring about different investors it's a real barrier, because after all, those, even though they are not real risk, the perceived risk can basically delay the investment or the decision to move forward with an investment that can make a huge difference. So I think that the perspective of what you just said about parceling the risk and identifying which ones are real, which ones are ones that are perceived, and maybe a further analysis, a further study can complement, and hopefully the studies that were put together by WRI and IDB can support those kind of lessening the perceived risks of nature-based solutions. Zaida, volvamos al sector público, pero esta vez desde una perspectiva local. ¿Cuál es el rol que vos ves a las autoridades locales en promover soluciones basadas en la naturaleza?
Muchas gracias de primera instancia por la invitación y por tener la oportunidad como gobiernos locales, ¿no? de manifestar un poco cuál es la postura, la situación y la importancia de visualizar una herramienta tan importante como soluciones basadas en naturaleza para esto, ¿no? Y si me permiten, me gustaría contextualizar la pregunta con 3 puntos, ¿no? Creemos que hay muchísima importancia, ¿no? O el primer punto a destacar es que necesitamos entender la importancia y el impacto de la implementación de soluciones basadas en naturaleza para apuntalar el tema de cambio climático y sobre todo el tema de la atención a la adaptación y vulnerabilidad que estamos viviendo a nivel local y que es muy difícil de manejar por los gobiernos locales, ¿no? El segundo punto es que estas soluciones, ¿no? Esta herramienta la tenemos que implementar, potencializar, arropar para garantizar que pueda ser viable, factible y efectiva. Entonces necesitamos apuntalar ese segundo punto. Y en tercero, algo que es en respuesta a qué podemos hacer como gobiernos locales, pues podemos acompañarlos. Y en este sentido, o revisando cada uno de los 3 puntos, pues me gustaría poner, por supuesto, como ejemplo, que estamos apuntalando desde el gobierno del estado de Yucatán, ¿no? Y aquí, desde el primer punto, entender el impacto y la importancia es que los gobiernos locales en muchos lugares, en gobiernos en vías de desarrollo o subdesarrollados, pues nos encontramos con la imposibilidad de poder implementar muchas acciones por falta de recursos, ¿no? Y no solamente recursos financieros, sino también recursos humanos incluso, ¿no? Entonces, esa es una de las principales barreras que tenemos como gobiernos locales y sí observamos que la implementación de soluciones basadas en naturaleza nos permiten reducir esas brechas de necesidades de recursos. Creemos que es una herramienta innovadora, no solamente en términos financieros, sino por supuesto también en términos de efectividad y de impacto. Los beneficios que se pueden tener implementando soluciones basadas en naturaleza a nivel local pueden ser muchísimos en temas ambientales, en metas de reducción de gases de efecto invernadero, en metas de absorción de carbono, pero también en metas de desarrollo sostenible para las comunidades, ¿no? El generar este impacto directo en las comunidades en beneficios sociales, en beneficios económicos, en beneficios de desarrollo, del bienestar que pueden tener, es muchísimo, y generar una comunicación efectiva y asertiva sobre este impacto, creemos que es una de las posturas más importantes que tienen que aportar los gobiernos locales. En el segundo punto, hacerlos viables y factibles, por supuesto, es acompañar a todo el proceso de generación de estas soluciones, y esto solamente se puede hacer si los gobiernos locales estamos comprometidos junto con las academias, junto con las asociaciones civiles que nos acompañan en procesos de apuntalamiento, de generación de información de calidad para poder apuntalar y hacer el riesgo que mencionaba la colega anterior menor, ¿no? En tanto los gobiernos locales podamos apuntalar y tener estas herramientas, pues vamos a ser más efectivos. Y esto nos lleva al tercer punto, ¿no? Y en Yucatán lo que estamos haciendo es precisamente mapear, generar estas interacciones, el tener una estrategia de acompañamiento y de recuperación verde que nos permita hacer de la implementación de soluciones basadas en naturaleza no solo una realidad a nivel local, sino un ejemplo de cómo implementarlos, cómo medirlos y cómo acompañar el impacto positivo de cada una de ellas.
Gracias, Aida. Muy interesante, porque creo que es muy importante el rol del gobierno local en cosas que me dijiste que son críticas. Uno, el involucramiento de la comunidad. Eso me parece clave, porque muchas veces las comunidades, si no hay este enlace, pueden sentirse desplegadas o desligadas del proyecto, que en realidad la intención primera es cubrir y proteger a estas comunidades. Entonces, ese rol crítico, angular que tienen las comunidades locales, los gobiernos locales, es muy importante. Y el tema de la data no es menor. Mucha data local, pueden hacerse unos estudios globales muy importantes, pero la data que tienen los gobiernos locales es única. Y saber que los gobiernos locales pueden no solamente contar con la data, con la información de los vecinos que saben dónde están los cuellos de botella, pero además esta alianza entre las asociaciones civiles que mencionaste, las asociaciones locales, es clave justamente para disminuir los riesgos percibidos que mencionaba recién nuestra colega Lisa. Ahora quisiera hacerle la misma pregunta a todos, a los tres, y escuchar sus perspectivas. Desde todo lo que hemos escuchado es sobre barreras y desafíos existentes, pero ¿cómo podemos trabajar juntos frente a estos desafíos y acelerar la implementación de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza? ¿Dónde ven las oportunidades para la región? Si me podés empezar, Alonso, desde tu punto de vista.
Sí, gracias. Sí, como les había dicho, creo que lo importante aquí es compartir las experiencias y compartir ese conocimiento que tenemos en los diferentes ámbitos en cada país. Y les había comentado la experiencia que tuvimos nosotros. Nos sirvió mucho la experiencia que tiene nuestro vecino país del Ecuador. Y creo que de la misma manera podemos hacer con otros países. Unos han avanzado más. Y esas experiencias, en algunos se ha tenido éxitos, en otros probablemente se ha tenido fracasos, pero creo que nos sirven mucho, de hecho, de este tipo de experiencias. Creo que algunas intervenciones, cuáles son más costo efectivas, es importantísimo saber poder trasladar en la medida de ciertas similitudes de las cuencas, podamos extrapolar este tipo de medidas. Creo que también, por otro lado, es importante la articulación en nuestro país, por ejemplo, cuando tenemos varias entidades públicas que queremos intervenir en un mismo espacio con una misma finalidad, es complejo. No es posible esa articulación porque hay un entramado legal que no lo permite. Entonces tenemos que, creo, flexibilizar ese aspecto para que podamos articular rápidamente las diferentes entidades y potenciar nuestras intervenciones en estos ámbitos. Creo que también hay que involucrar mucho al sector privado, pero también hay que bajar o de repente reformar el sistema legal para que pueda ser mucho más ágil ese tipo de intervenciones. Y yo creo que finalmente las intervenciones locales con las comunidades, en nuestro caso, en nuestro país, nosotros tenemos que conversar mucho con las comunidades, crear acuerdos voluntarios con ellos, sentarnos, tratar de convencerlos, porque también hay unas ideas que probablemente en contra de este tipo de actividades, y hay que trabajar bastante duro. Entonces, creo que hay experiencias en este tipo, me parece que en otros países también las hay, y podamos intercambiarlas de tal manera que sea mucho más efectiva nuestra incidencia en estos ámbitos con soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, y sobre todo en nuestro caso, para asegurar la sostenibilidad de los servicios de saneamiento de una gran ciudad que se encuentra en un desierto, donde no hay agua, y creo que garantizar el agua para una gran ciudad es importante, y creo que con estas soluciones basadas en la naturaleza es interesante, y creo que lo podemos lograr. Gracias.
Gracias, Alonso. Lisa, what are your takes? Where are the biggest opportunities of investments in the region in nature-based solutions?
Yeah, I think that one thing that I want to say is I really agree with the points that my co-panelists have made on this topic. And in terms of thinking about accelerating deployment, I just want to emphasize that it's really important that we are thoughtful around our approach and how capital is deployed. The point that was made earlier with regards to different needs being the core approach depending on the local geography. What are the needs of that community, whether it be a water or waste management or a forestry approach? As we think about all of these ecological challenges and environmental challenges, I think it's important to have that local perspective. But one thing that I'm also mindful in our work is that there's a lot of potential for unintended negative consequences for the communities impacted by this activity. And at the same time, this is an opportunity to really direct more business to Latin America and the Caribbean and really drive commerce and boost trade, which is key to job creation and green recovery. So one thing that I think is an important concept is really the concept of inclusive growth. And it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. How can we have advanced economic empowerment, but also do it where we're improving access to, healthcare and education and affordability. And so really it's important to have a holistic approach to how we think about deploying capital in these communities for nature-based solutions. I'm very cognizant of the fact that there are a number of large institutions who are coming into this space. And I just think that it's very important to be very mindful of the local communities, what they bring to the table, rather than simply imposing a view. I think there's somewhat of an interesting tension and a question around, do we lose out on impact with scale? Do we dilute our efforts if we're moving hundreds of millions and billions of dollars versus that very local, small grassroots impact? And how do we find something in between? I think we can't just rely on intentionality, because there are lives and economies at stake, and we really need to do this right. So I think I'll just continue to emphasize that partners can bring unique sector and local expertise that's required for these projects to not just get off the ground, but to also scale.
Muchas gracias, Lisa. Zaida, una última reflexión.
Claro, con todo gusto, nada más. Pues creo que coincidir con mis compañeros. De hecho, creo que aquí uno de los grandes retos es precisamente hacer coincidir estas oportunidades que desde el sector público, desde la importancia sectorial, llámese biodiversidad, agua, desarrollo urbano y demás, desde el sector privado e incluso las asociaciones y la academia, pues necesitamos generar o cursar un proceso, y ahí está el gran reto, ¿no? Un proceso de armonización de estas áreas de oportunidad que tenemos en cada uno de nuestros sectores, y yo apuntalaría a que lo que tendríamos que estar visualizando es a generar una política integrada que nos permita no solamente hacer coincidir estas áreas de oportunidad que hoy tenemos con el crecimiento verde, con el desarrollo inclusivo, comentaba Lisa, sino pensando en la permanencia de esto y que no se conviertan en proyectos, sino se convierta en un esquema de desarrollo en las áreas donde se está visualizando esta oportunidad, ¿no?
Muchísimas gracias, Zaida. Muchísimas gracias a los tres por sus valiosos aportes. Creo de esta conversación inicial, que espero que continuemos en el futuro, me llevo algunos mensajes. Si bien hubo algunos desafíos respecto a cómo armar este tipo de proyectos, capacidades, formación incluso dentro y fuera de las comunidades, hay una oportunidad muy grande de convertir estos proyectos en inversiones y en realidad que no solamente sirve para una naturaleza o proteger la naturaleza, sino que también sirve, como dijo Lisa, para el crecimiento inclusive, dando oportunidades tanto de acceso como de crecimiento a distintas regiones de Latinoamérica y el Caribe, para poder justamente lograr proteger la naturaleza, pero también tener los beneficios que esta protección de la naturaleza trae, tanto económicos como de salud, como de cambio climático. Con esto quisiera quisiera cederle la palabra a Adriana Lobo, directora ejecutiva de WRI en México. Adriana, gracias por acompañarnos.
Buenas tardes, muchísimo gusto estar este día de hoy por acá con ustedes, más con un tema que es tan relevante en este momento como las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Pienso que es un momento de celebración al tener ese nuevo reporte en que estamos cada vez más profundizando en el potencial de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza para traer cambios en la infraestructura y en el medio ambiente y en el medio rural a través de grandes proyectos. Como ha comentado Lisa, existe todavía una diferencia muy grande entre el riesgo real y el riesgo percibido y pensamos que ese tipo de informe tiene una gran relevancia en dos aristas. Una, en bajar esa percepción de riesgo, en empezar a analizar con más detalle los casos, cómo se están dando. La verdad estamos tomando algo que está empezando a tener más significado, que va creciendo. Pensamos que esa percepción de riesgo, a la medida que la analizamos, como es el caso de reporte, se puede ir bajando e incrementando de manera muy significativa el tipo de financiamiento para esas soluciones. En un momento en que son cruciales, vemos la gran importancia a la medida, dando el ejemplo de México, en que este año tuvimos 80% del territorio en sequía, necesitando recuperar agua de lluvias y una serie de medidas, inclusive para mantener la agricultura, y por otro lado, otros estados con inundaciones terribles, en que más bien pasan una gran parte del año ya con pérdidas muy relevantes también por el régimen de agua tan cambiante. Entonces vemos una gran necesidad, una creciente necesidad, y pensamos que la serie, ese es el primero de esta segunda serie de reportes que estamos haciendo con WRI y el BID, que van a permitir comunicar mejor esas decisiones como parte de la agenda para los mercados y esperando que la oportunidad realmente se vaya incrementando. Para cada dólar invertido en ese tipo de infraestructura del sector privado, la evidencia está colocando que logramos realmente más que recuperar, pero además con una capacidad que ha comentado tanto Alonso como Zaida, también Lisa, con ese potencial de crear un crecimiento más inclusivo, de hacer el tipo de soluciones mucho más juntos con la comunidad, mucho más integrados, soluciones más holísticas, que no se trate solo de arreglar el medio ambiente en que viven estas personas, pero que también pueda traer acceso a la salud, a la educación, y que se vaya transformando en iniciativas mucho más sostenibles, de una manera más holística, más integral, que son mucho de lo que estamos necesitando en ese momento. Esperamos que el espacio también nos abra, como comentó Alonso, a muchas más posibilidades de compartir experiencias. Pensamos que también tiene un gran potencial en términos de bajar el riesgo percibido y el challenge, o sea, el reto, pero también la oportunidad de ir buscando crear nuevos mecanismos de trabajo interinstitucional, porque normalmente esas soluciones más integrales necesitan trabajos conjuntos que hoy en nuestro marco institucional, la mayoría de los países, tenemos bastante dificultad de poder avanzar. Y finalmente, para no reducir el tema de la data, el tema de los datos, que sí se necesita generar fuentes nuevas y tener cada vez mejores fuentes de datos. El momento para el lanzamiento de este reporte se celebra ahora en ese momento antes de la COP. WRI y el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo y otras organizaciones vamos a poder llevar para aumentar el diálogo, para aumentar ese intercambio y en ese gran evento y en ese gran momento y con la posibilidad y con el seguimiento de trabajo para alcanzar muchos resultados tan necesarios para los países de América Latina. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Adriana Lugo, por tus palabras y a todas y todos por seguir con nosotros, ¿no? Y ahora sí, vamos a retomar la conversación entre el presidente del Instituto de Recursos Mundiales, Ani Dasgupta, y el presidente del BID, Mauricio Claver-Carone, sobre los desafíos del cambio climático para la región hoy, cómo la mitigación y el crecimiento verde pueden ser efectivamente un motor importante de la recuperación post-pandémica y cómo encontrar los recursos financieros para hacerlo realidad. President Dasgupta, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be joined by President Claver-Carone of the Inter-American Development Bank to discuss how the IDB is upping its response to climate change, the critical moment facing Latin America and the Caribbean as COP26 approaches, and the opportunity to drive more investments into climate action and a green recovery from the pandemic, including through nature-based solutions. This conversation is a part of the launch event for a new research from IDB and WRI entitled Nature-Based Solutions in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's been an absolute pleasure to collaborate with IDB. For those of you who might not know, nature-based solutions are strategies that enhance the health of nature to achieve tangible development outcomes. Investment in nature solutions, or NBS to be short, offer three kinds of benefits. They can help countries improve infrastructure delivery, avoid losses from climate impact, saving countries billions of dollars each year. For example, wetlands and forests can absorb and filter floodwater, which helps to protect downstream communities, maintain water supply, and avoid damages to buildings and roads. Nature-based solutions can also generate direct economic gains through jobs in tourism, increased productivity of food, fish, timber, and most importantly, they can deliver other benefits from cleaner air to protection of biodiversity, and critically, NBS can provide 1/3, I repeat, 1/3 of the climate mitigation needed between now and 2030 to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. These win-win solutions have been around for decades, but especially have gained real traction since the Climate Action Summit of 2019. Nature-based solutions is now a core theme in climate action worldwide, and it's really a priority for Glasgow COP26. In fact, some people are calling this the Nature COP. The COP is setting aside November 6th as a Nature Day and have a session in the first 2 days as 150 heads of states will gather. And they're setting us on 3 hours of discussion just on nature. These are all very good signs. So, President Claver-Carone, this is an absolute pleasure to be here with you. How are you? And it's been a pleasure to collaborate with you.
Thank you so much, Anya. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for World Resources Institute. And hey, it's been a mutual pleasure here working with you as well.
Thank you, Mauricio. Mauricio, Latin American Caribbean region is one of the world's regions that's most affected by the impact of climate change. However, the region also has much to gain from aggressively addressing the issue today as part of the green economic transition, something that you're focused on. How would you describe the challenge and, most importantly, the opportunity for the region?
Yeah. Hey, look, I think you mentioned it before. We have great momentum here. And like I said, this is part of, the enthusiasm that we have and the mutual enthusiasm we have, the joint work that we're doing to consider really what climate change means for the future of Latin America and the Caribbean. And look, yes, and you said it, that's in terms of both the vulnerabilities, obviously, which we're all familiar with, but also, and you hinted towards it, the tremendous potential that our region can realize with the right green policies going forward. Our role as the region's leading development bank is to really help our 26 borrowing members mitigate, adapt to the risk, and really help seize what we see as a once-in-a-generation opportunity that's been presented by the pandemic to really, ironically, to rebuild sustainability. And that means really looking at a holistic approach, focused on creating benefits, both in terms of healthier climate and new opportunities for both green jobs and growth, because it's not a zero-sum game. Green jobs create growth. And you asked me how I describe this challenge. And look, our region is at a historic crossroads, and that's going to force countries to look at climate through a zero-sum winners and losers lens. The point here is that there's not going to be any losers here when we talk about climate. We can all win if we see and pursue the opportunities. Our reality is that the pandemic hit our region harder than any other, with the highest per capita death toll in the world, the worst GDP contraction in 2 centuries, and that's the presidency I walked into at the IDB in the region. But look, like the pandemic, climate change is presenting challenges daily to our region as well. So in addition to all of that, we see 8 of our countries have been ranked amongst the world's top 10 most at risk to climate change. So add that to the challenges. So we've already seen some of the warmest temperatures on record last year. And this year, we already had a record-breaking Atlantic hurricane season. Parts of the Amazon region and in the Pantanal, we've seen droughts, which are affecting the economy of Brazil. It's affecting supply there, and it's been the worst in 6 decades, which is another record year, in addition to forest fires that we're seeing there. Now, these impacts have significant economic costs. We estimate that unless global warming is limited to less than 2 degrees Celsius, our region is going to suffer damage from climate impact that's going to reach $100 billion annually by 2050. So you ask, what do warmer temperatures, more fire, stronger storms in Latin America and the Caribbean mean beyond our borders? And that's going to mean beyond our borders, pricier commodities, packed shipping routes, destruction of crops, and that's going to lead to tens of millions of people seeking migration to migrate from all throughout the Americas in the coming decades, and mainly due to food insecurity. So the push to green economies worldwide is going to be linked to our region as well. And remember, one example is our region, and this is a great opportunity. Our region has large quantities of lithium, rare earth elements that we're going to need to sustainably source to make batteries for electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels, et cetera. And now, unlike the pandemic, the difference here is that there's no vaccine for climate change. So it's really a matter of priorities, commitment, bold mitigation, adaptation, investments that we got to follow through on. So it's really a matter of deciding whether to invest in or innovate for our future in this regards. Now, public budgets, we are seeing them throughout the region. They're extremely tight, particularly after all the anti-cyclical measures in response to COVID-19. But it's also a fact, and not recognized enough, that climate action is highly compatible with economic growth. When I first joined the IDB a year ago, my first priority was to work with our experts to design a blueprint for strategic investment that's going to accelerate recovery, sustainable, inclusive, long-term growth, and do so with a plan that break down barriers. And that's the result that we saw with our Vision 2025 strategy, which we launched at the annual meeting in Barranquilla in March. And it prioritizes bold action on climate change as one of the 5 pillars, the central pillars here. But that also focuses on integration, strengthened value chains, digitalization, support for small businesses, gender equality, all of which together are linked to a sustainable future. We think here we see well, got an echo there. We see with the right, we believe that with the right fiscal policies, decarbonization of our region's economies are going to create 15 million net new jobs by 2030 in areas like plant-based food production, renewable energy, construction, manufacturing, et cetera. And every dollar that we see invested in making infrastructure and economies more resilient can generate up to $4 in economic benefits. So look, the evidence is overwhelming. It's clear. Climate action is business friendly. Let me give you an example. Costa Rica. There we're supporting the National Decarbonization Plan, achieving net zero emissions. And we believe that's going to yield $40 billion plus in net benefits within 3 decades through savings in energy, improvements in ecosystem services, agricultural yields. Let me give you a larger economy, Peru. That achievement could bring $140 billion in net benefits across sectors. So as we head into COP26, we're working in a wide variety of ways, with more ambition, more innovation, more partners than ever, like WRI, to really unlock critical climate finance and drive sustainable recovery for our region and our people need.
Mauricio, I really like specific examples you used, our audience would really connect what you're saying to outcome. I just want to go in 2 weeks, little more than 2 weeks, the world leaders will gather in Glasgow and COP. You'll be there. This is a very important moment for the world, for the leaders to come. To be honest, the intervention to date has not really come up to 1.5 degrees or less than 2 degrees. What is at stake for Latin American Caribbean in this meeting, for this region? IDB is defining itself as a leader, the innovator of this area. So what is the role that is, in this, your role here in the crucial moment for global focus when the world is coming together?
Yeah. Hey, look, first and foremost, I'm really looking forward to being there at COP26. And I can tell you that the way the COPs organize the region have usually been characterized by the power of multilateralism and how it's applied towards a common goal. And we hope that that same spirit will very much be present in Glasgow so that we can really broker a just and ambitious agreement to keep that 1.5 degrees alive. And I'm a defiant optimist, right? Like that's my energy. That's who I am. Let me state here that by the end of 2021, at least 75% of our regional member countries will have presented their updated nationally determined contributions, in many cases with IDB support, and we're proud of that. In terms of concrete results, our countries that can hope for in Glasgow, one would be progress in the definition of the guidelines for carbon markets. And we're looking there to work with our members to build governance, transparency pillars for carbon credits, for example. Our countries are also going to be in need of more finance, technology transfers to really help them build resilience in the face of worsening climate impacts. And I mentioned before that action on climate change is in our Vision 2025. It's enshrined in it there. And indeed, we aim to be, and we will be, the main partner for Latin America and the Caribbean in reaping the development benefit of climate positive recovery from this pandemic and moving forward. So we're going to advance in Glasgow this agenda in several ways, and I'm not going to give them to you right here, but get ready for some big announcements that we're going to make there. So alongside with our executive team, I'm going to be there. We're going to underscore, and I'll give you just kind of a highlight of where we're going to be heading, that we're going to be practicing what we preach. To date, the IDB group has committed to a floor of 30% climate financing between 2020 and 2023, ensuring some $5 billion in annual support to climate action. And we're going to be looking to go even further on the road ahead. We've also committed to assessing disaster and climate risk in 100% of our operations by 2023. And in line with the global commitment to limit the rising temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to avoid the point of no return, we started the process of aligning our own operations here at the bank to Paris Agreement objectives. At our annual meeting in Barranquilla last March, the IDB member countries requested our assistance to help integrate climate considerations and funding into those agendas and policies, which was really an essential step to enable better planning and budgeting for adaptation and mitigation. So there's going to be a lot more of this in Glasgow. I'm super excited about it. So please stay tuned. Let me also state, though, this year, we launched an Amazon initiative here at the bank, which we mentioned in Barranquilla, that seeks to really forge sustainable development models there based on human capital, natural wealth, cultural heritage of this irreplaceable part of the planet, which, as you know, we all know, contains the largest continuous tropical forest in the world. Just this past week, the Green Climate Fund approved a new $600 million Amazon Bioeconomy Fund that will be one of the core financing instruments for our initiative. So we're working hand in hand there. And the creation of an Amazon unit that we're working on within the bank and that we are almost ready to launch is also going to help ensure that we meet that financing goals. And we're just not standing still. So we're going to have a lot of further announcements on funding for this and other projects soon. But everything I announced in Barranquilla headed towards $1 billion is happening. On the road to Glasgow, the IDB has also led a joint effort with all multilateral development banks to really mainstream nature in our operations and strategies and continue bringing the nature and climate agendas closer together. We're going to have news to share on that front as COP as well. I feel like I'm cheating you at a bunch of news, but we should have done this after. But anyway, you're getting some previews here. Moving forward, though, these joint efforts are going to be key for all of the MDBs to really further develop projects, business models, financing instruments, and help reverse the drivers of nature loss and promote protection, restoration, and sustainable use of nature and its services. The United Kingdom has inspired this line of work, and we're really grateful for our close cooperation across the whole gamut of initiatives leading to the summit. We're also going to be unveiling a new climate microfinance initiative that's going to be a regional first. We're excited about that. We're really pushing the envelope here. I mean, obviously, on our financing, on improving our internal structure to prioritize and break down barriers for climate, increase our engagements, external partnerships, make meaningful commitments. And these announcements are just going to be some of the ways that the bank has redoubled its work on climate change since I came to office on October 1st of last year. And I think, look, it's starting to show results. Behind each of these announcements, there's a deep pipeline of related projects across all of our countries, sectors, and we're going to forge progress in areas as different as, for example, the blue economy in the Caribbean, which is also very exciting, and electromobility in the Southern Cone. So lots going on there, and really looking forward to that. But now I get to flip the script. Now I'm going to put the pressure on you, Annie. So I get to ask you some questions, and I'm going to start with one. Look, from your perspective, because I need to learn from you here. This is a mutual exercise. From your perspective as the head of one of the world's premier think tanks in this field, I want to know what we should learn. What do you think Latin America and the Caribbean stands to gain or lose from COP? Give us some good advice.
First of all, Mauricio, it's very exciting to hear about all your announcement. I wait to hear the surprising one that you're going to have in COP. I'll be there cheering you on. Look, I think this COP is special for a few reasons. One is this is a moment of solidarity. Last 2 years has been really hard for everyone concerned by disease, by economy, what's happening on multilateralism. This is a moment for countries to come together. 150 heads of states will be there, Mauricio. So Latin America and Caribbean region connecting with each other and the global order is very important. Second, you already mentioned this is a COP that comes after a devastation of our economies across the world. So your focus on Vision 2025, connecting good jobs with green economy and recovery is exactly going to be a topic. So one thing we will see a lot out of coming out of the COP is how can countries recover. But finally, the most important issue I think that the Latin American region can get is exactly what you talked about in financing. The pandemic and the economic crisis, this is all connected. Our research is showing nature-based solution can be better for economy, creating more jobs, and in the right places. We already discussed climate benefit of the solution can provide. And we want to make sure getting sufficient funding flow to these projects. And I think this is where IDB can be critical in actually how the region recovers. COP serves as a critical platform for resources for Latin America and Caribbean for the pursuit of green recovery. And the magnitude of the finance is what needs to really scale. This has been really a test case for the global leaders here. The OECD report estimates about $79.6 billion would be assigned from the north to south. This was agreed, the $100 billion per year was agreed in 2009. We think it'll get there. But what we also think that this number, 100 billion per year, needs to be near 400, 500 billion for global south countries by 23-24. That's what our research is showing. So the question is, will we get to that ambition? I think the IDB committing 5 billion in climate change, this is music to my ear. This is absolutely fantastic. This will help countries and countries to go to get to that 500 billion that is required for the recovery. This growing part of public climate finance is critical for achieving scale. And I just want to point out scale here is the question. And to be honest with you, we don't see yet, and this is why what you said earlier was so important, only 3% of climate finance uses nature-based solution for climate mitigation, and 1.5% uses nature-based solution for adaptation. This needs to change to get to the recovery we want, the growth we want, and the climate reduction we want. So that's where we are, Mauricio.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Andy. And I got to say, though, I always look at things with the glass half full, and you even hear from the private sector. They're looking for green solutions, green strategies. So I think thanks to leadership like institutes like yours and yours personally, I think we've come a long way, and obviously a lot more needs to be done. But let's feed off that momentum. And look, you mentioned funding, you mentioned financing. That's the main issue. However, back to the point that we were saying before, here in Latin America and the Caribbean, this imperative comes at a time of historic debt burdens, and there's been a great deal of focus on finding new sources of financing and innovative financial tools. So I'd love to describe what we're doing here at the IDB, and I think that I'm picking up on that momentum I was talking about. But first, from your perspective, I want to learn, what do you see as the most promising approaches to financing climate action, particularly in light of the global economic recovery that we're aiming for?
I think, Mauricio, you're absolutely right. I mean, different finances have to align. I think this is the role I think you're playing, right? You're bringing public finance, private finance together. From our research, what we see is the game changer that even 2 years back you wouldn't have talked about is actually flow of private finance into development, into climate solution, into nature-based solution. I think this is a really different moment. And we are seeing growing number of private sector companies committing to, and not just climate, but nature as well. Last year, institutional investor announced over 100 billion for nature, fueling a growing market for environmentally sustainable investments. You talked about carbon market, which is an incredible excitement there. If that starts working and that market starts working, we will see more private sector money flowing because of a functioning carbon market. But I must point out that despite these commitments, the money from private sector is not yet flowing. So there is commitment and actual flow to investment, and the barrier to that is worthy green economic packages that prioritize NBS, so actual investmentable projects, which is what I think that you are focusing on, and I'd like to hear a lot about that. But our research is showing there's a number of ways private sector can mobilize to NBS, and a lot of positive things. Green bonds for green infrastructure, insurance policy for coral reefs, blended finance packages that allow hard-nosed investors to fetch their target returns on nature investment. The more engagement of investor and NBS is needed so that these models of financial innovation, which is absolutely happening, that can be replicated and scaled in all over Latin America and Caribbean. But Mauricio, going back to, there are a lot of things IDB is doing on this area. I just want to make sure our audience hear the exciting approach in financing that you're pushing forward in IDB. Mauricio, back to you.
I thought you'd never ask, and I led you with the previous question, so I'm glad you asked. Look, we know that business as usual, and I agree with you, it's just simply not working. So whether on climate change or efforts to realize economic growth, that status quo is not cutting it. So that means that we have to not only sharpen our focus on results, but we need to do it. And that's what Vision 2025 is about. And we need to think outside the box, innovate in terms of the financial tools, it's key, and the approaches to private sector mobilization, which is going to be at the heart of it. So let me tell you about some of the things that we're doing. And really, I can start making some news on this one right now. Since I teased on the previous, I'm going to give you some stuff right now, some news right now. The IDB and the Rockefeller Foundation, we're launching a new partnership dedicated to eliminating energy poverty. That's going to address climate change and empower underserved communities in Latin America and the Caribbean. Specifically, organizations are going to join forces to close last mile gaps in energy access through distributed renewable energy service and thereby support transition towards net zero emission system. And this is going to mark our first collaboration with a philanthropic foundation in the energy sector. We're going to be working with the Rockefeller Foundation in advance of Glasgow in the hopes of having more news then as well. As I mentioned earlier, we're delighted that the Green Climate Fund's new $600 million bioeconomy program is going to help us invigorate sustainable development through our Amazon initiative. And also last week, the IDB board approved a loan and grant to Peru to create a special purpose vehicle to direct funding through financial institutions for bioeconomy businesses that are going to restore, preserve ecosystems, and support climate positive investments. This is the first of its kind blended finance model that we hope to attract significant private investment to small businesses and large enterprises that are going to be tackling the joint climate and nature crisis together. So you see, we've been busy in this regards, and I've gotten a lot, but I haven't even gotten another one that I'm really, really proud of, and I think this is going to be game changing. Last month, we announced a groundbreaking natural capital asset class, a whole new class, natural asset class, NACS. They're going to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Our innovation incubator, IDB Lab, worked with a company called Intrinsic Exchange Group from the very beginning of this when they came to us with this radical idea that I think is going to change the way that we do business on this. Fast forward, today, we have the birth of natural asset companies, these NACs, and they're sustainable enterprises that are going to hold the rights to ecosystem services produced by natural working or hybrid lands. Now, leveraging the power of the market. Now, the market to therefore countries, companies alike can be compensated through these for their nature positive management. And through an IDB project, Costa Rica is going to be the first country to offer its natural capital in this new exchange. So let me share some facts about a few other innovations in this regard, including of how we crowd in, as we call it, private financing. The IDB as well has pioneered green bond market in our region, which has doubled in 2 years, obviously far short of the potential. And alongside our private sector arm, IDB Invest, we launched what was called a green bond transparency platform, which is a digital tool that's going to boost investor confidence to be able to allow them to follow the entire chain of these green projects. This year, the bank also assembled the largest ever coalition of private sector partners comprising some of the world's biggest, most influential companies. And that coalition has more than tripled in size. And some of the topics that companies have expressed interest in working with us include electromobility, sustainable tourism, green hydrogen, accelerated decarbonization. These are priorities. They're coming to us with this. In parallel to that, we're developing debt for nature products, and we're designing now in an advanced stage of some more debt nature bonds that's going to generate significant funding for marine protection, resilience, and other priorities for another one of our member countries. Also, we're looking at risk-sharing mechanisms, developing technology platforms to facilitate connections between investors, for example, like BlackRock and others, with projects on the ground that are seeking financing. We need to do that matchmaking. So you see, we're mustering all of its lending, mobilizing might, technical expertise, and more than ever at this point to really try to break paradigms in this regard. So I hope we do you proud.
Mauricio, first of all, you've been busy, but I like what is, I think I and the audiences would like is how you're trying to use the forces of market towards nature. There's companies that have been launched, using the stock market. This is really innovative, cutting edge stuff. Speaking of new financial tools and approaches, this event, in a few minutes, our audience will hear about the launch of the series that WRI and IDB has produced together on nature-based solutions for the LAC region, right? It finds that the full potential of nature-based solutions remains unrealized due to lack of fully financed project. So given this deep engagement of IDB, what do you think will take to scale nature-based solutions in the region to meet the urgent climate and development needs we face? Also the recovery from the pandemic that we face.
Yeah. Look, I think that the report series that we're going to launch today makes clear that nature has to be at the center of our collective response to climate change, and that a green recovery has to be at the center of it. And I'm pleased that nature is going to be one of the main themes at this year's COPs. Nature-based solutions can account for a full 40% of the reductions in carbon emission that are needed to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius by 2030. Now, we all know that nature is also a vital global asset, and all economic activities depend directly or indirectly on the services that nature provides, from raw materials to pollination. So let me just give you a fact that we should share far and wide and repeat over and over as we work toward social and economic recovery in Latin America and the Caribbean. Nature-based investments create nearly 40 jobs for every $1 million invested. That's more than 10 times better than for investment in fossil fuels. 10 times better than for investment in fossil fuels. So now when you combine that with job creating potential of bio-business, really nature should really be considered an employment powerhouse, a powerhouse. And that ought to inspire public and private investment. And that couldn't be truer than in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is home to 40% of the world's biodiversity, more than 30% of the planet's fresh water, and almost half of its tropical forests. At the same time, of course, the world is witnessing an unprecedented and really, in the end, highly self-destructive level of biodiversity loss today. So it's kind of counterproductive. And these facts underpin our ambitions to really develop, for example, the Amazon sustainable bioeconomy, as I mentioned before, the new natural capital asset class, the NACS that I described, which we're really proud of, and the collective MDB commitment to nature as a whole that we're leading ahead of the COP. Now, what we all need is a shift in perspective, a profound realization that nature is an incredible asset and not simply a cost for conservation, not a zero-sum game. That shift in perspective for countries, engineers, financial sector, development banks, it's really the first thing needed to scale nature-based solutions. And I should mention that IDB was an early leader in the natural capital space. France, the UK have generously funded the bank's Natural Capital Lab, which really works across the IDB to support our clients in this area and attract private financing to the natural climate nexus in that regards. And that includes working to integrate nature-based solutions into our country strategy processes from the start. Just over the last 5 years, our infrastructure sector and our climate change sustainable development sector invested in 28 projects with MBS components, totaling over $800 million in financing. We've also championed innovative blended financing instruments that are supported by the Natural Capital Lab. Yet, despite all that, the fact remains that while many NBS projects are being implemented in Latin America and the Caribbean, they're still seeking funding needed in order to be able to scale up operations and achieve envisioned benefits. That said, although infrastructure service providers and private companies really stand to benefit from these nature-based solutions, only a minority of projects in our region have secured funding or participation from those entities. So we have to change that narrative. Governments, infrastructure service providers, investors, they need to step up their committed and really their commitment in this regards, along with us and us being catalyzers and unlock investment for these projects, which I'm sure that we're going to discuss as part of the panel in today's event. The reports that we're launching today will show how we make this happen in Latin America and the Caribbean to create jobs, to support climate goals, and to protect and restore nature. So again, thank you to WRI. I really commend our teams, our WRI and IDB teams, really who worked on these reports. And once again, thank you, Ani, for our discussion, for the ability to collaborate means the world to us.
Thank you, Mauricio.
Muchas gracias, presidente Dasgupta y presidente Claver-Carone, por esta importante conversación. Les agradecemos a todas y a todos una vez más por seguir con nosotros. Gracias por la paciencia con algunos temas que a veces pasan con las transmisiones en vivo. Y les invitamos a bajar y a compartir los reportes que lanzamos hoy y que hagamos llegar las iniciativas de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza a toda la región. Muchas gracias.